because I rarely get angry. So I would almost say an irritation or a frustration. And one of the things that causes me to be frustrated is when I'm coaching executives and they tell me that they have back-to-back meetings pretty much every day of the week, and they allow no time for thinking, for reflecting, to give their brain a break so that they can be most effective in the workplace. And I don't think that's really a great way to operate from a leadership perspective, nor be a great role model for their teams either.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to yet another episode of The Angry Coach. Today, I have Coach Sue Stockdale joining me all the way from London, United Kingdom. Sue, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Vivek. I'm delighted to be here.
The pleasure is all ours. To introduce Sue, Sue is an executive coach. She works with very senior leaders in the corporate space in trying to help them move to the next level. May I also add that Sue is an extreme adventurer. I think she's amongst the few people I know who've made all their way up to the North Pole. And I know that she continues living up to her desire to be an adventurer, seek new adventures, and live her life to the fullest. Sue, welcome once again.
Yes, I think you've given a great description, Vivek.
So I'm curious, and I asked this question, what makes you angry?
Well, that's a great question, Vivek, because I rarely get angry. So I would almost say an irritation or a frustration. And one of the things that causes me to be frustrated is when I'm coaching executives and they tell me that they have back-to-back meetings pretty much every day of the week, and they allow no time for thinking, for reflecting, to give their brain a break so that they can be most effective in the workplace. And I don't think that's really a great way to operate from a leadership perspective, nor be a great role model for their teams either.
So you're saying when leaders are too blocked back to back and are not able to give time to their own self-reflection or for others who might be important, that is what makes you angry. Is that correct?
Well, yes, these days many people are working virtually, and they are driven often by the way that their computer system sets up calendar invitations. So they are meeting every single hour of the day, and in between those meetings, there is no space to stand up, even get a hot drink, a cold drink, actually just think about preparing to be their best selves in the next meeting. And what I discover then is they come to a coaching session with me, and in that time, they're just able to talk out and think out what, in a way, many times they could be doing in the daytime. And they leave that session and say, wow, that was a really great use of time. I've heard myself think, I've talked through my ideas, and now I'm better equipped to be a more effective leader. And yes, that coaching space is really valuable to be working with somebody who's objective and non-judgmental. I also think there's a lot that leaders could do for themselves to role model the behaviors they ideally want to see in their teams, allowing the brain to have a break, to be less stressed and be more focused to going into meetings. I know Microsoft have done some research on it to show that when people take breaks, their brain can be more relaxed, it actually can be more effective in the meetings that they go into. And the tech can do that. It's just people perhaps don't make the commitment to take control of their diaries and manage their time in a way that's actually going to enable them to be most effective. And if my job's helping leaders to be effective, then that's what I find frustrating, when they're not taking that commitment for themselves.
That is such an important observation. I completely agree that the self-reflection time is something that adds so much value to a person's own thought process, what is truly important at that particular point of time. In your experience, Sue, what prevents people from just taking this very simple, very commonsensical, so to speak, of step?
Well, there's a wonderful thing called habit, Vivek, and we all get into habits. And I think for many leaders, and I think this is was exacerbated during the pandemic when we were all forced to work virtually, that we kind of succumbed to the way that our tech is set up. And as I say, then it's just like, I've got a space in my calendar, there's a 3:30 minutes, book something in. Not saying, well, what was the previous meeting? Do I need 15 minutes to give myself a bit of a break? Do I need time to prepare for this next meeting? And as a result, we just see a calendar as a space. And if it's empty, we just need to fill it in with something. And what many leaders that I help through this start to reflect upon is how they can do the simple thing of taking control of their day. So they might block in 30 minutes at the start of the day to think about the day ahead and how they're going to be preparing and influencing people that they're in meetings with. They might then block in a time, a longer amount of thinking time someday in the week, but they'd put those blocks in first and then enable others to manage around that. What often happens is the leaders are then reactive to other people wanting commitment in their calendar. But if we want any of us, if we want to be at our best selves, our brain needs time to have a break, to process what has just happened in a meeting or a conversation, to be able to then focus and get perspective and be ready for the next meeting. And after all, if meetings are an important part of how organizations work, we really want to make them as effective as possible.
Right. We do want to make them as effective as possible. Now, I'm also thinking, for example, right, multiple demands, multiple pressures, too many things coming at the same time. We're trying to do more with less. And a lot of executives and people you coach would perhaps be pressurized with all of this, correct? Everybody wants to pack 25 hours in a 24 hours day. So how does this self-reflection time that you're highlighting the importance of get factored inside?
Well, that's a great question, Vivek, because yes, I recognize that leaders are in great demand. Their time is of great value to many people. What can be one way to consider themselves as a leader is I encourage them to think about themselves as either a bottle of expensive aftershave or a bottle of expensive perfume. Put on too much of that, and then you've completely overpowered anyone that's around you if you're wearing too much of your scent. So a leader is like that. They've got to think about if they're going to give somebody a dab of their time, effectively, just like a dab of aftershave or perfume, where will that add most value? And if they were really reflecting on how they're using their time, do they need to be in every meeting? Who could they have instead? Could that meeting be done in a different way? Is the meeting happening because people haven't actually prepared ahead of time and said, here is now our proposal, what do you think? So that thinking time is considering many of those questions, looking at the value that leader's bringing and where they can add most value. I think we all have heard of the Pareto principle, that 80% of our business comes from 20% of our clients.
Correct.
So if we think about that from a leadership perspective, 80% of the value that a leader brings will probably be in 20% of the conversations that they're having in any given day. So are they best performing in those meetings, in those conversations to be highly effective? So even just asking that question now, inviting somebody to reflect upon that, they need a little bit of time to do that. Where do they get that time? And it's not necessarily sitting at home in the evening later on. That is part of the job of a leader, is to be most effective. I know I come from a sporting adventure background, Vivek, you talked about earlier. To perform at one's best in those high performance environments, recovery and taking a break is an important part of performing at one's best. So there's an element of that I really encourage leaders to bring into the way they work in the office as well.
How interesting. And so what I'm hearing from you is, in the busyness of delivering business, for example, people forget to ask this question, where am I truly adding value? Or where do I need to truly add value? And it's only when I step back can I question Do I need to be in this meeting, or can this be delegated in the right way? And if I am present in the meeting, then am I crowding out the other people who can emerge as good leaders if I'm not present? In a way, restricting the growth of my own organization. Is that fair?
Yes. And often what causes a leader to be in a meeting with their colleagues and the people that they're delegating to is because they don't trust them. So this takes our conversation into a whole other angle about how do leaders build psychological safety and trust so that they can truly let go and enable their teams to perform.
That is such a fantastic insight. And what I'm hearing from you is most of the times, if I am a leader, I am getting inside because I have failed to build the trust or the principles of trust in the right way with my team. And I'm not able to trust them. And so I keep jumping inside. I want to take every micro decision myself or be a part of the taking of that decision because I perhaps don't have the trust.
Yes, exactly. And also within that, to grow one's team is to see the role of a leader as an enabler. So right. my value as a leader, if I was taking myself as an example, my value as a leader, my identity, nobody may ever recognize that I've made something happen. The team get the reward. They get the glory. But what I know is I've enabled that team to perform. And that's where people sometimes struggle moving from a manager position to a leadership position. Because as a manager, they are responsible and get rewarded for productivity and results. Very often they are doing. Now moving into a senior leadership position, they are not doing in the same way. They are influencing. They are setting the vision. They are enabling others. That takes a bit of a mindset shift. And often leaders are pulled back into being involved in their team decisions and activities, not because they need to be there, but because they want to be there, because it's serving their identity and what they think is value as delivering from a leadership perspective.
That is such an insightful point. It's not because they need to be there, it's because they want to be there because it is serving their need of certain self-validation of being wanted. Is that correct?
Absolutely, yes. So you can see that by starting just with the question of our calendar and how we use our time, it really can take us into many different conversations.
I would completely agree with you, Sue. And this is such an interesting point. Now, supposing I am a leader like this, Sue, I am an extremely busy block leader, let's say, and I am deriving a lot of self-worth out of it also, as you rightly pointed out, because now I'm being wanted. Now everybody wants time on my calendar and things like that. I, so to speak, become a bottleneck. What damage do I create in the organization? Because clearly there is something that I'm restricting the organization with. And as an organization, what should we be doing with this kind of a leader?
Well, I think, an organization perhaps should get that leader a coach and help them.
That's fair. Help him.
And help them to get new awareness about how they're operating. It's not that these leaders are necessarily consciously behaving in that fashion. As we know that there's a great phrase that Marshall Goldsmith, the coach, talked about, what got you here won't get you there. Right. And it's exactly that. Leaders that have been successful in the past and been working their way up an organization have had a certain approach. When they get to senior position, it often requires a change of behavior. And often then they have blind spots. They have habits that have served them in the past that won't serve them now. And only by taking time, by making space to reflect on those things, to think about how they can actually be at their optimal performing. And that's where the role of a coach can really add value. If an organization doesn't want to work with a coach, the leader themselves has to find some trusted peers or colleagues that maybe they can sit and reflect with. So it all takes time to have that awareness, because ultimately the aim is for those leaders to be performing optimally to help the organization succeed. So the organization really needs to invest in those people to help them be at their best.
That's a very fair point. And having a coach is a great way for a person to be able to have a third person look at his or her work, question some beliefs, and therefore help them improve.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. So I'm curious, you're in this business of coaching. You've been in the profession of coaching for a very, very long time. in what ways have some of the leaders leveraged you and your expertise?
Well, in many different ways, Vivek. I do often use the metaphor of adventure when I'm coaching a leader and talk about themselves and me going on an expedition together. And we've got a very clear focus about what the outcome is of that coaching engagement. But along the way, we're going to have to trust one another because we're both going to probably have to be vulnerable at different times. So it's not only the coachee, the leader, that is vulnerable in a coaching session. The coach has to also be prepared to be vulnerable and to learn. And there will be crevasses, there will be obstacles that we won't know, that we will discover along that journey. So helping a leader to come to a coaching engagement or a conversation with a degree of excitement. That's what I always want to encourage them to think about, that this is a journey worthwhile taking. It's not remedial action. It's not that something's wrong. It's like, how can you grow and be an even better leader? And wouldn't that be of value to yourself, to your organization, and to your family when you're happy and proud about what you've achieved? So it's really a win-win-win all round.
That would be a very fair point. Any interesting cases that come to your mind? Any examples of leaders who you helped make a shift or take an adventure journey with you? What were their before and afters like?
Well, before would be the typical example I gave at the start. Somebody who's basically back-to-back meetings in their calendar.
Right.
And what we then did is we started to explore that, and with the question about their dab of aftershave and where that would be most effective, they began to be aware that many of those conversations that they were involved in, they didn't really need to be involved in. So the very simplest thing, took 30 minutes at the start of a day and blocked it out in their calendar. And that was their thinking time to say, okay, looking ahead in the day, what are these most important meetings? Do I really need to be in them? And if not, how do I then not just step out completely, but how do I then perhaps get the information in a different way? Or say, tell me in the 1 hour meeting, I've only got 10 minutes, so I can join you for 10 minutes. Tell me in that 1 hour when would be the most appropriate time to join. So I don't have to sit in it for 50 minutes and not being effective. So now I'm starting to think more strategically about how I add my value in terms of my time. So the person then reorganized their calendar. They then began to work with their teams to reflect upon what the teams would need to feel confident enough to take action and make decisions without the leader. And very often that is about, rather than the leader coming to a team meeting and saying, what's going on? Tell me about what you're doing. It's shifting that around to say, team, I'd like you to come and share with me what are the critical few things that need my time and attention here. And I'd like you to come with possible solutions, and then we'll look at those together. So now the responsibility, the empowerment is on the team member to take themselves to be prepared to be organized in those meetings and not just sit and wait for the leader to pronounce on what the answer should be. So once the leader that I was working with in this situation had begun to have those types of conversations with their team and said, my intention is not to be in this meeting in the future. I believe all of you can get the answers yourselves. It takes time to then just move towards that. But gradually the leader then began to make more space in their calendar. And what they used that time for was actually then really thinking about, how am I adding most value to my team? And that's often about paving the way ahead, because you've got your strategy for the organization. You know where your people need to get to. Sometimes those blockages are just conversations with other departments, other peers, that maybe their department's slowing up progress in some way. Your job as a leader is to influence and engage those senior people. So now I start to look upwards and outwards. I look outside of my department, my organization, maybe into the industry, and I start to then be far more strategic and add value in a completely different way. And at the end of that engagement with that individual, they were spending that 80% of their time being strategic, as what I've just described to you, and 20% of their time with their team. It switched it around completely from where they started. So they were actually adding far more value to the organization.
That's such an interesting case study. And I love the way you strung the pearls right from the beginning at, let's say, looking at the calendar and navigating all the way on to being strategic as a leader, and therefore refocusing yourself through this entire process. Right?
Yeah, it's
And
really an identity shift for a leader.
it's a very big identity shift. You're absolutely right. And perhaps a lot of them don't even see this looking outward as a part of their core job. I think a lot of us just keep, because we have the real value of working inwards and letting the teams do or delivering the goods from inside, that we forget that being strategic or looking outwards is a very core job of whatever we are doing.
Yes, and that's where the new ideas can come from. That's where the
Right.
disruptive thinking can start to emerge, because a leader can see what's happening in a completely different industry sometimes. I often share insights in those coaching sessions I'm having with leaders. They often say sort of like, tell me what's happening in a different industry. Now, of course, I maintain confidentiality, but I can give sometimes examples or insights of how particular problems are solved in different industries. And sometimes that brings new ideas, fresh thinking to the leader. Sometimes it just gives them comfort, because they're sort of, the question in their mind is, am I doing it right? Am I leading correctly? And by helping to understand that in a broader context, many other leaders face those challenges and solve them in similar ways, the leader effectively thinks, oh, right, I'm doing it right, and I'm not alone in the struggles that I face. So they feel a little bit more confident.
That is such an amazing insight. So thank you so much for sharing this. This is very helpful. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit over here. And I'd love to dive into the adventure part of your life. Tell us more about it. Curious to hear.
Well, you used the word curious there, Vivek, and that's curiosity that really drives me. I used to read a lot of adventure books as a child, and I began to imagine that I'd love to be an adventurer. And opportunities came along as I grew up that enabled me to get to some very remote parts of the world. In fact, I became the first British woman to reach the magnetic North Pole back in 1996. Wow. Now, I never imagined something like that was possible, and yet it had happened. And I said to myself, I took time to reflect, and I said to myself, surely there had to be a bigger reason for this achievement, this success. It's not just photographs in an album. Imagine if I could use my own experiences to inspire other people to get to their North Pole, because they also must have that potential inside of them. And if maybe my sharing my experiences, my insights will help them, will motivate and inspire them, then that will make me feel that my journey has been really worthwhile when other people then get that chance to get to their North Pole, because they now have new awareness and motivation. And I have to say that, Vivek, since that expedition back in 1996, that is what I have been doing. That is my life's purpose. And I bring that mindset, that adventurous mindset, to coaching, because these days in the world of uncertainty, and that's what I've experienced a lot of in my adventures, when you're skiing across an ice cap and you don't know if you're going to meet a polar bear or fall in a crevasse, or the cold temperatures are going to suddenly get worse, you've got to be able to cope with that uncertainty. And all of that really begins in your mind. It's all about managing your mindset in those difficult situations. And I just see there are so many analogies and similarities between the world of adventure and the world of business. And so I think I'm able to do that crossover quite well and bring the experience of adventure, which I'm still doing, by the way. I was out with the camels in the desert, in the Wadi Rum desert in Jordan just earlier this year. I bring that experience and I help people in business get to their North Pole. So for me, it's really an integral part of who I am.
How do you manage your schedule? Because everything takes time. And I know that you have a very busy coaching schedule as well. How do you manage this?
Well, I do have to role model what I was just talking about earlier, is taking control of the schedule. And if sometimes if you do want to do something enough, then you have to plan for it. And, I can't go on an expedition tomorrow because my schedule wouldn't allow it. But I do have to be thinking long term and say, okay, well, maybe later this year or next year, what would I like to do? And, is there a budget for it? How can I take the time and make the time to do that? So it's always, just like in business, thinking long term and setting an intention and then working towards making that happen. And, over the years, it gives me a great deal of satisfaction reconnecting with nature. Somehow in that environment, when you're sitting under the stars in a desert, for example, you feel so insignificant. And really, as human beings, as leaders, we think we're important, we think we're controlling things, but actually, in the grand scheme of the bigger system in this world and nature, we're so insignificant. And that is a really important lesson in humility, I think, because it just reminds us that, we've got to really work with the world around us, work with the people around us to be effective, and not just think that we can work against all of those things. So that's the kind of simple life lessons that I hold, and I always make sure I schedule in those adventures if I can.
What amazing life lessons. And let me share with you what I took away. I think the first thing that I took away was know your north, right? So to speak of, know your north. Make sure you're moving towards that direction. The second thing that I also absorbed from you is that how insignificant we are in the larger, grander scheme of things. So therefore, working on our own personal egos or on what is important, it's important to work in an ecosystem and respect the ecosystem one is in. And I think the third one that I definitely take away is never let the adventurer in ourselves die, because at the end of the day, we are all just adventure seekers. We all want to step out and explore the unknown, and don't let that within us die.
Yeah, what a lovely summary, Vivek.
Excellent. So thank you so much for your time today. Before I wrap this one up, is there anything else that you'd like to share with our listeners?
No, I just really encourage them to take time to do that thinking, to do that reflection, and to have an adventure.
Excellent. So for your time today and these great insights, thank you so much.
Thank you, Vivek. I've loved our conversation.